The hottest, driest time of year is quickly approaching, and for some it's already here. As usual this time of year, many of you are asking about watering. It's not like I haven't already made quite a few videos about this, but well, maybe it's time for a little refresher. Today we're going to look at a few little tips and tricks so that those of you who are lucky enough to go on vacation can leave with peace of mind. Or at least, so you can leave your garden for a few days without watering and not worry about everything dying. And I'll say right away, we're not going to talk at all about do-it-yourself automatic watering Oya or homemade drip irrigation systems. And I'm going to explain to you why, for me, those techniques are far from being the best. So today we're really going to talk about gardening without watering, or at least with minimal watering. You'll see it's actually simpler and more relaxed than any homemade drip irrigation system. We're mostly going to talk about vegetable gardens, but what I'm going to explain here works for any type of planting in the ground, so we won't be talking about container gardening. That will be in a future video, just saying. If you have any questions about watering plants that aren't in the ground, like potted plants, or if you have tips for watering those plants less, let me know in the comments. Put away your watering cans and let's start the video. Let's look at how to reduce our garden's water use by changing our watering methods in the short term. And then we'll see how, in the longer term, we can make it so our garden needs less water. First, one thing we can say, I think, is that most of you, or at least those who are just starting out, are watering your gardens way too much. And that doesn't have many advantages, except maybe having bigger vegetables, but with less flavor, which isn't necessarily better. Unless you're in the mass business and need to sell lots of vegetables to make more money. Well, to be honest, I'm not really talking to you, but to everyone else. For those seeking a low-water, productive vegetable garden, well, I think the main thing is to water as infrequently as possible, but when you do water, water as much as possible. Basically, the idea is to encourage deep rooting of your crops, whatever they may be. I'm mainly referring to vegetable gardens, but this applies to all plants. Water infrequently, but deeply each time. Watering heavily makes water penetrate deeply, but it also requires longer intervals between waterings. During that time, the soil will dry out well on the surface. And the plants will have to send their roots a bit deeper. If the plants put their roots deeper, it also means they'll find more mineral-rich water there than near the surface. Drip irrigation or frequent watering delivers water straight to the roots. The water can't absorb minerals quickly, so these vegetables usually have less flavor. Do you see why now? Using drip irrigation ensures regular watering, like the Oya technique, like the bottle technique, with a small hole that will drip for several days. That way, you can go on vacation and you'll have soil that stays moist on the surface for several days. This surface water where plants root lacks nutrients, so the vegetables have less flavor. That's why I don't really like these techniques. And that's why I prefer a more natural garden with plants that will put their roots deeper. Now let's see how much water we should put in and how often we should water. But here, don't forget, and this is a phrase I really like, it depends. It depends on a lot of things, and above all, it depends on your type of soil. If you have heavy clay soil, you can leave it longer without watering. If you have light, sandier soil that will drain water, well, you might need to water a bit more often. By the way, if you don't know what type of soil you have and you don't know how to find out, I'll refer you to a video I made about soil that will help you figure out what type of soil you have. So to give you some numbers, I'll rather give you some examples from experiences I've had in my previous one. I had very sandy soil, and on this sandy soil, in the middle of summer, during a really dry period, I watered it once a week at most, usually every 10 days. That's the most I've done. Because then, on heavier soils, you'll water less often. Here in Marsac, I have more silty, heavier soil that retains water better. And what's the date today? It's June 24th, the end of June, and I watered my vegetable garden for the first time just a day or two ago. You can see the size of the tomatoes, those already on the plants, and how production is going. Just so you know, I never watered these crops until yesterday, since the day I planted them. However, on the day I plant, I water them well. So, for those who are used to it and already practice these methods, you know that it can work like this. But for those who do things differently and are used to watering their garden every day, every 2 days or every 3 days, generally those people don't believe in it. Because when you water every 2 days, if you stop watering for 2, 3 or 4 days, the plants get thirsty. I'll explain why it works that way and why watering less often makes plants less thirsty. It may not seem logical, but that's how it works. I'll explain how. I've been doing it this way since I started growing plants, and it's by watering like this that it works best. I'll explain later how to fix things if you've watered too often and want to water less. When I plant most of my heavy feeding vegetable plants like tomatoes, peppers, zucchinis and so on, when I plant in late April or early May, I water heavily. At planting time, I take my plant, make a hole where I'm going to plant it, fill that hole with water, wait for the water to settle at the bottom, put my plant in there, fill the hole back in, and that's it. That's a heavy watering, so the soil is fully saturated. And from then on, I don't water anymore. I don't water again until the day the plant really needs to be watered. And in my case this year, the moment when I had to water again was almost 2 months later. Watering crops every 3 days versus every 6 to 8 weeks makes a big difference. I was saying earlier that the time between 2 waterings depends on your soil type, and that it's good to know your soil type. To know what will be needed is one way. There's also a simpler way. It's just about knowing how to listen to your plants, so to speak, or at least knowing how to read the behavior of the plants. To know whether it needs to be watered or not. The problem is we often water plants even when they aren't thirsty, thinking it's needed. So here's a little example that should be pretty clear. You see these squashes, so here it's these squashes. On a hot, dry day, you can see the leaves droop. They look very thirsty. All of them, except maybe one that's a bit more in the shade over there and has its leaves a little more upright. And already that should give you a clue. But let's imagine, you see all your squash like that with the leaves drooping? If it's very hot during the day, don't assume they're thirsty. Maybe wait until later in the evening when it's cooler to see if the leaves perk up. Not here, those same squashes here were 2 days later than the footage you just saw. We haven't watered them in the meantime. We haven't watered them right now. It's cooler, shady and more humid, so they're doing fine. Here, botanically, we say they're turgid. Their tissues are full of water because they're in their element. Everything is fine for them, but if at some point it gets too hot, if the air is too dry, then it doesn't suit them. They protect themselves a bit by putting their tissue under negative pressure to avoid losing water. It's just that it doesn't suit them at that moment. Even if there's enough water in the soil to avoid losing it, like they protect themselves, but as soon as it gets cooler, they stand back up. And so, when it's like that, there's really no need to water. They're not thirsty. Observe your plants and see if the leaves stand upright, like these Ediantilles or my nearby tomatoes. If the leaves are upright, the plant doesn't need water. When you first plant a zucchini or tomato, the young plant is usually in its first few weeks. It has little foliage, needs little water, and shouldn't be overwatered. Water it when you plant it, then wait to water again until the plant shows it needs it. For me, it was 2 months later. And so then when the plant is thirsty, we give it a big watering, a really big watering. Depending on the soil type, use 1 to 3 watering cans. Every meter of planting, I have beds that are about 60 to 80 centimeters wide for planting. There will be 1, 2 or 3 rows of planting or a mix of plants. Because I create growing areas with many different plantings, and on each planting meter of these rows, I usually put, let's say, 2 or 3 watering cans, which is generally a bit more than what most people use. The goal is for water to penetrate deeply. Don't just moisten the surface, it needs to soak in. This lets the surface soil dry while staying moist deeper down, which is the real secret and technique. If you've been watering too often and you want to space out your watering, it's going to be pretty much the same thing. First, stop watering and observe your plants to understand their needs. And when the crop starts to get thirsty, when the leaves really start to droop, that's when you'll water and you'll use the amount D that I mentioned. Depending on soil type, use 2 or 3 watering cans per meter of crop. And since your plants have shallow roots at first, you might need to repeat this watering. After 3 or 4 days, you'll add 2 or 3 more watering cans and then you'll wait again. Gradually, the plants will root themselves more deeply. Gradually, you'll notice your watering intervals become increasingly spaced out. If you start a little too late and it's summer and the air is very dry and the soil dries quickly, well, it might not be as effective as if it had been done from the beginning. And if you still need to water once a week, that's already a little better than watering every 2 or 3 days. Watering once a week lets you take a short vacation if you're lucky. Well, obviously there are plenty of other things you'll need to take into account. Regarding watering frequency, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the frequency will depend on quite a few things. The type of soil you have, the soil texture, sandy soil, silty soil, clay soil. It also depends on how demanding your crops are. Some crops require more water. Cucurbits are very demanding. Zucchinis, squashes, melons, watermelons, and solanaceous plants like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, all of these need a lot of water. You can group these crops together since they're the first to get thirsty, making it easier to care for them. Separating demanding crops and mixing them with less demanding ones doesn't make sense because you'll need to water multiple areas. If you group them together, in fact, then watering will be done in just one place, so you'll need to use a little less. Grouping doesn't require the same row. Rows can simply be next to each other. Being side by side helps the soil absorb water more easily, compared to if the rows are a bit separated from each other with less demanding crops in between. Consider these things at the start of the season. When you're planning your crop rotation, when you're thinking about where you're going to place each of these crops. At the start of the video, I said I'd discuss long-term techniques to reduce water needs. And now we're going to look at another thing that helps the soil retain more water, which is the organic matter content of the soil. Earlier, when I mentioned soil type, I meant its texture, sandy, silty, or clayey. It's not just the organic matter content, but you should know it also affects the soil's water retention. The more organic matter there is in the soil, the more your soil will behave like a sponge and retain a lot of water. So if you want to need less watering in your vegetable garden in a few years, start now by adding as much organic matter as possible. This can be done in several ways. You can do this in winter by adding shredded wood, ramial chipped wood, dead leaves, woody carbon-rich materials, or straw. That works a little bit too. Hay is a bit less effective. The less woody it is, the less rich it is in carbon material, the less it will affect the level of durable organic matter in the soil. So it can be done in winter when there are no crops. You can add a lot at once and continue adding more throughout the year, remembering to do so regularly. If your soil lacks organic matter, it will gain some. So to sum up, in the vegetable garden, we're going to group the demanding crops together, increase the organic matter content, and then water a lot, but not often. That's for the vegetable garden. And there are still other things we can do to make the garden as a whole dry out less quickly. And so to make the garden less water demanding, or in any case dry out less quickly, we can work on two fronts. We'll work on shade and on wind. Well, I say two fronts, but actually with this, we'll tackle both in the same way. One way to add more shade is to plant trees in the garden, not a lot of trees, not right next to each other, so that there isn't shade everywhere. Sure, the vegetable garden needs sunlight, but we'll add some trees here and there. As you can see, there are already trees around me in the garden. It will make some areas cooler, more humid, and alter your garden's microclimate. That's what we can do in the garden, and it's also important to plant trees. Hedges should be a bit denser and surround the entire garden. On one hand, limit the wind with the trees. The wind will blow less strongly, and the other thing that trees do, besides limiting the wind, with their leaves they evaporate water. And so they make the air that blows less strongly over your garden also a bit more humid, less wind and slightly more humid air. That significantly lowers your vegetable garden's water needs. Clearly, it's hedges. The size, height and width of these, it depends on your land and garden size. In small gardens, you can't add many or make them too tall or you'll lack enough light. And for larger gardens, you can put in taller, wider hedges. I won't discuss that now, but let me know if you're interested and we can make a video about it. Besides planting trees and hedges around the garden, you can also provide shade for your crops by growing them under something. Shade structures or under pergolas like mine. There are many ways to make them, various topics about this, and different methods to create shade for your crops. This is a big topic, so I won't cover it in detail here. Instead, watch my first video to learn how to build this type of pergola. But on my channel, go type shade, heat wave, pergolas, and you'll find plenty of videos I've made on these topics, and you'll surely find some interesting ideas in there. Now, if you still need a few more tips to reduce your watering, we'll cover other interesting topics, including centropy, competition, and lost profits. I've mentioned in several videos that I was experimenting with centropic agriculture, or at least trying to use some of its principles. I've already noticed 2 or 3 things from the tests I began this year. In centropic agriculture, we talk a lot about density, about planting, and about planting a lot of plants on top of each other. On this row I have here, I would need to take the time to count, but I have at least something planted every meter of the crop. I have an 80 simard wide bed here, and every meter must hold at least 20 different plant varieties. I'm going to have vegetable plants, a lot of plants that I really grow to harvest and eat. And besides that, I have plenty of plants that are there to produce biomass or to act as ground cover for the biomass. I'll also grow vegetable plants like bantam cabbage, comfrey and horseradish. So all these plants, the daylilies a little bit, these plants, I won't hesitate to prune them if they get too big, to produce a bit of biomass and to create some mulch directly on site. That way I don't have to bring anything in. So one big thing I've noticed with these crops is that despite the planting density and the number of different plants, these plants aren't thirsty at all. Here, just like with the crops I have next to them, I watered them for the first time just yesterday or the day before when they started to get a little thirsty. It's been at least 2 months since I planted everything here, and it has all grown without being watered once. As you can see, water needs are quite limited, even with many different plants. I think this should be limited since several factors are already at play. The fact that there are lots of different kinds of plants and lots of different root systems mixing together means that each plant will go explore different areas of the soil. And the fact that there is competition means that each plant might go a little further, might go a little deeper. To avoid exactly that kind of competition, the other thing that happens is that there's so much density that sunlight doesn't reach the ground. The ground is very shaded by the plant cover. You don't even really need mulch. There's so much plant density that the soil stays cool underneath. The fact that the soil stays cool means there's a lot of life in that soil. These soils are very much alive, and the life in the soil itself will maintain a certain level of humidity, a certain amount of water. A soil full of bacteria and small creatures contains water in all these living beings. When they die and eat each other, it helps keep moisture levels up. After that, many other factors come into play. Fungi in the soil, like mycorrhizae, may also seek out water, possibly between establishing plants. There are things we probably don't know, but in any case, the fact that all the plants are together means that they have, and I think they need less water than when the plants are alone and the soil is bare. Also, there's something else. There are various types of plants, including some for biomass, as I mentioned. Ground cover, this lets me manage different crops and their unique needs. When will the plants get thirsty? 2 days ago, before I watered a little, some plants were starting to show signs of thirst. That's a sign that yes, the amount of water is starting to not be enough and we're going to start getting really thirsty. When I notice these first signs, I tell myself it's time to water, but I won't just water. I'm going to prune certain plants, and that's when I'll prune the plants I need the least. My biomass and ground cover plants include comfrey and sorrel. Daylilies, cabbages and other plants used for ground cover and biomass. I'm trimming most of the foliage, as I mentioned about the loss of potential gain and how much water these plants use. Reducing foliage on some plants lowers their water needs. So the water I'm going to add, that I'm going to use to water, then the water I add will go further. On the vegetable plants that I haven't pruned compared to the plants that don't have foliage, because no foliage means no evaporation and therefore less need for water. So I'm going to prune some plants, keep others, and then do a heavy watering. So basically, to sum up, when all these plants start to get a little thirsty, I'm going to prune the less important plants. Leave this plant material as mulch on the ground on growing areas or paths to cover the soil, and then water heavily. And so it's mainly my vegetable plants or the plants I'm going to harvest that will benefit from it. But the plants I've pruned will also grow back, regrow their foliage and restore that plant density that will cover the soil. I can repeat this process whenever my plants get thirsty. So maybe I'll make another video to tell you how long it took before I needed to water again, just so you know. So I planted 2 months ago and did this first watering and this first pruning now. 2 months later, and there you go. This bed doesn't seem thirsty at all anymore. That's it, it's recovered now. And for now, this method is working very well. We discussed watering in open ground. Next time I'll cover watering potted plants. So once again, if you have any questions or tips to share, don't hesitate, let me know in the comments. If you liked it, share the video, comment and give a thumbs up. I appreciate it. It makes me happy and helps the algorithm. Thanks to those who do it. If you'd like to support me, there's a link here and below to my Tipeee page. So thank you very much to everyone who supports me financially, without whom I wouldn't be able to take the time to do all this. All right, maybe I'll wish you all good watering, or maybe not. Let me know how it works for you, and I'll see you very soon in the next video. Hi everyone,